Hello there, I am H.J. Cronin, author of fantasy, horror and crime, and I am bringing you the facts of fantasy. Thank you to the 4 people who have subscribed so far. It means a lot and I hope you continue to like the content I make. In today's video, I'll be going into the complex subject that are elves. We will be looking into the history of them, the types of elves, and lastly, the best bit, elves in fiction. Sit back, relax and enjoy. Elves are a species that are seen in both fiction and throughout history. The two are entirely different kinds of creatures, which I'll go into later. Elves generally have a broad range of appearances. The most notable is them having pointy ears. Just like dragons, elves have been a part of human history for many millennia. Elves are mainly a supernatural being that came out of Germanic folklore and mythology. Their closest cousins outside of Europe are actually in Japan. These are called yokai. Yokai are also supernatural beings seen as monsters, spirits and demons in Japanese folklore. However, the European elf is the one that you and I are most likely to be familiar with. Set aside your perception of elves as high beings in Middle Earth and realise that the real elves are completely different. They are associated with being dangerous, harming humans or livestock, seducing people into sexual relationships, and being general nuisance. These traits have come out of medieval texts, so we don't know if these have been influenced by Christian scholars, as little is known about pre-Christian Europe, as our ancestors didn't record their beliefs. It is, however, widely believed that the ancients, all the way from the Balkans to Britain, once upon a time believed that there were creatures living in every part of the world, as close to them as their forests, on the paths, in the roads, by the streams, in the houses, everywhere. Elves came in many forms. A popular belief is that our ancestors worshipped them as domestic gods, sort of like demigods. These wights were worshipped all over. If they honoured the elves or house wights, then good fortune would fall upon them. If they shunned the elves or house wights, then they would cause mischief. Things will go missing, livestock may be killed, that kind of stuff. The Christianisation of Europe soon turned these spirits into demons, where over time they became feared. In the modern day, it is hard to believe that elves and other spirits like them once existed. People stopped honouring them with offerings and stopped taking notice of them, so they eventually vanished from our house and joined their kin in the wild, although some are returning to homes. Elves and other spirits inhabited every part of the landscape, spirits in the trees, plants, animals, etc, etc. These things were all respected. You wouldn't just go and chop down a tree, rituals had to be performed. You couldn't just build a house, tests were made on a piece of land to see if it was suitable for a dwelling to be built. The domestic elf and other spirits lived around the hearth of the home. In modern times, it is probably known as the fireplace, where the family congregated the most. The fire provided warmth, cooked food and light. It basically was the heart of the home, and everything happened around the fire. So you can look at elves in 2 lights. Either demonic creatures bent on our destruction and torture, as Christians would have put it, or you can cut them a bit of slack and accept them as our neighbours. These spirits were rarely seen by people. You can see them out of the corner of your eye, and some people are lucky, or unlucky enough, to see them fully. There are plenty of stories about them that come out of Northern Europe. One notable for me is a family owned a farm. One day they went into the barn and saw an elf sweeping the floor. The elf looked poor and wore rags, so the family went and made the elf some clothes and a pair of shoes. They gave the elf the clothes and the shoes, and soon the elf thought highly of himself, and domestic worth is suddenly beneath him. So he left the family forever, leaving the family to pick up the hard work of looking after the farm. Stories like this exist all over Northern Europe. It sounds similar to elves in Harry Potter, like Dobby. Once you give them clothes, they're free to go. Iceland luckily provide us with the most evidence of elves. They exist in the Eddas, which are a collection of Norse poetry, and also many sagas. The gods of the Norse were associated with elves, well, some of the gods, particularly Frey for example. In Iceland they are known as Huldufólk, which means hidden people. Still, in Iceland today they will build a road around a rock that locals believe to be the home of elves. As you can tell, the history of elves is an extensive one, with many arguments. It's up to you to make your own conclusion as to what is the right interpretation. Are they the demons that Christians would have us believe? Or are they just beings who have as much of a right as us to live in the world and were once worshipped as gods? That creak in your house, that thing that goes missing when you swear you knew where you put it. Think about elves and house spirits. Leave them something of worth or some food out for them, and possibly see your luck change. Here I will go into the types of elves. I will start with a fictional elf. They are usually highly majestic beings with magical powers, however they are extremely diverse, so I'll focus on them more in the fiction segment and now move on to other types of elves. The Mare. A Mare is sometimes referred to as either a goblin or a dark elf. These scary creatures sit on the chest of their human victims and bring them misfortune and terrible dreams. It is where we get the term nightmare from. People who suffer from sleep paralysis have often spoke about seeing or feeling another being in the room with them. Some of these people even see a creature on their chest. Very, very scary stuff. The Docalfa. Docalfa are dark elves that exist in Norse mythology. They dwell underground on Earth and are first seen in the Prose Edda. They are described as blacker than pitch. Some scholars liken Docalfa to dwarfs as they dwell underground. Nevertheless, their name translates to dark elf. Los Alfa are light elves, which dwell in Alfheim, which means home of the elves. They are the opposite of the dark counterparts, as they are described as being fairer than the sun to look at. Svartalfa are black elves, also known as dark elves or dusky elves. They dwell on Svartalfheim, which means home of the black elves. Much like the Docalfa, the Svartalfa appear to be synonymous with the dwarfs. Nisse, Tomte and Tonto. These are supernatural beings. Like the domestic spirits I spoke about earlier, they exist all over Scandinavia, including Finland, Norway, Sweden, Denmark and Iceland. They all have their own names though in these countries. I mention these as sometimes they are spoken about as if they are in the family of elves. They all have a very similar appearance. Long pointy red hat, basic clothes and are very small, who have immense strength. They are said to be an echo of our ancient ancestors, an old being that dwelled in the land where the farm had been built. They protect the home and farm. Generally, they work extremely hard, but if there is any disrespect from the humans, for example, no offerings, bad practices, then the Nisse would cause mischief, kill livestock, or leave the farm for good. Nixie or water sprite. Nixie are found all over Northern Europe. They are water dwellers. In some parts, they're quite similar to the Greek sirens, who lures men to water to drown them. Last but not least, my favourite, in fiction. For this section, I'll pick out 5 famous fantasy realms where elves dwell and briefly speak about each of them. Number 1. Middle Earth. The majority of elves you see in fiction are based on Tolkien's elf, so this is a massive shout out to the man himself, the legend that is Tolkien. Thanks to the Silmarillion, we have an extensive origin story for the elves in Middle Earth. They are one of the oldest inhabitants of Middle Earth, awakened by Eru Ilvuata under a starlit sky. They are fair, wise and beautiful. In the Silmarillion, it states that the Dark Lord Melkor, later to be Morgoth, turned some of the wandering elves into orcs. The elves in the world are immortal. If they do not die in battle, or from grief, or from weariness, they go to the Undying Lands, known as Valinor. Notably, in The Lord of the Rings, the elves begin to leave Middle-earth to the men, and begin to leave en masse to the Undying Lands. Later, Frodo, Bilbo and Gandalf joins them, and then also Gimli joins them as the first dwarf to ever cross, and Sam joins them too. Elves have been involved in every notable conflict. Their most hated foes are the orcs, however there is some hostility with the dwarfs. The elven warriors are feared on the battlefield, applying tactics that outsmart and mostly destroy their orcish counterpart. They also battled Balrog, set of the Dark Lord Morgoth in the First Age. There are also dark elves in Middle-earth, known as Morin Quendi. They are less known however, and are not documented as well as the other elves. Here is a quote from the Silmarillion. Those elves, the Calaquendi, call Umanya, since they came never to the land of Oman and the Blessed Realm. But the Umana and the Avari alike, they are called the Moraquendi, elves of the darkness, for they never beheld the light that was before the sun and moon. Notable elves: Elrond, Galadriel, Thranduil, Legolas, Fëanor, Arwen, Gil-galad, and also Elrond's sons, who I can't remember the name right now, but Elrond had 2 sons. Number 2. Dungeons and Dragons / Forgotten Realms. In the high fantasy world of Dungeons and Dragons, elves come in all shapes and sizes. Elves in D&D are a race that has been around for an extremely long time. They are found in forests, shrublands, and generally in the wilderness. These elves are more nomadic and prefer the simple life than building great nations, although it is not unknown for them to develop these nations. They usually live for up to 200 years, but one of the eldest elves known is 900 years old. They are slender, strong, insightful, and also have keen senses. They mostly meditate rather than sleep, relying on the land to help them rest. There are many sub-races of elves: wood elves, high elves, wild elves, aquatic elves, and most famously the dark elves, also known as drow. There are also half-elf species, created when they mix with other races. Wood elves are copper-skinned elves that guard over their forests. High elves are very similar to Tolkien's elves. They are highly civilized, light-skinned, and naturally good with magic. Their sub-factions are the Moon Elf and the Gold Elf. The wild elves are the most commonly found out in the wild. They are feral and stay away from civilization. Being at one with nature means more to them than the industrialness of a city. The aquatic elves are water-breathing and live in the oceans. They live in families and clans and have the least magical abilities of all the elven races. Last but not least, my favourite, the underground dwelling drow elf, also known as the dark elf. They are dark-skinned, usually purple-skinned, with white hair, and live in the Underdark. They are usually evil and live in family factions within cities ruled by priestesses. They worship the Spider Queen. The drow are taught from a young age to be cruel and violent, so that all kind of emotions leave their bodies. The most notable conflict of the elves was the Crown Wars, fought during the early history of Faerun, over a period of 3,000 years. This is what led to the near extinction of the elven race, and is why they are scarce in modern times. Notable elves: Drizzt, Eowyn Teshur, Belwar Disengulp, Aerie, Jaheira, Viconia and Devir. Number 3. World of Warcraft. Elves are one of the longest lived species on Azeroth. They are known for keen perception, grace and spell work. There are also many subspecies of elves. The 2 most dominant are the Night Elves for the Alliance and the Blood Elves for the Horde. The Night Elves extend back to ancient times. They are both powerful and mystical. They founded the most magical and advanced civilization in Azeroth. They were amongst the first to study magic and bring it out into the world. They have dark skin and golden eyes, and are fierce warriors. It was at Mount Hejau that the Night Elves joined with the Alliance, whereas before they were hostile to both the Alliance and the Horde. The Blood Elves were once High Elves, but changed their name after the Scourge invasion of Quel'Thalas, in memory of the Fallen. The Blood Elves retook most of Quel'Thalas from the Scourge. They have emerald green eyes and light skin. Their physiology undergoes visible reaction when exposed to fell magic. The vast majority soon join the Horde, proving to be a vital asset in their war. Notable elves: Queen Ashara, Malfeon, Stormrage, Sylvanus Windrunner, Illyria Windrunner, Talthressar, Lorthromal Theron, Kalethas Sunstrider. Number 4. Elder Scrolls. In Elder Scrolls, elves are known as Mer. Mer are conditionally fertile, which means they only conceive when the population pressure is low. This stops them entering wars with their other neighbours, keeping them isolated for much of the time. Their average lifespan is between 200 and 300 years old. As is with other elves in fiction, the Mer are an ancient race that has branched out into different races. I'll talk about the 3 main races of elves in the world. They are the Altmer, Bosmer and the Dunmer. The Altmer are high elves. They consider themselves the most civilised people on Tamriel. They strive to keep the appearance of their ancestor race, the Oldmer, through select traditions surrounding marriage and reproduction. They are more slender than humans, but not as strong, although they are generally taller. They are among the most intelligent and magically inclined races in the world. They also have a strong resistance to disease. Bosmer are the Wood Elves. They are clan folk who are referred to as Wood Elves. They call themselves Bosmer, which translates to wood/tree people. They have a wild tendency and youthful energy. They have an adventurous personality. Much unlike the Altmer and Dunmer, they prefer a simple life with nature and its creatures to the hustle and bustle of civilization, and the Aldmeri high culture, they excel in stealth roles such as being scouts, agents and thieves. They are most known for their skill with the bow, being the finest archers in all of Tamriel. The Dunmer. The Dunmer are the Dark Elves. Their name comes from the dark skin they have. They originate from Morrowind. They have red glowing eyes and are known to be extremely strong, intelligent and very quick. They are experts in destruction marriage and swordsmanship and are proficient in archery. They are also superior warriors to many of the other folk in the world. They are very distrustful of other species. Dark Elf is a term used by those in the Empire. Notable Elf: Queen Eärien, King Lalorian, Akmalexia, Ulundil, and of course the player character whoever you decide to play with. Number 5. Warhammer. Elves live all over the world in Warhammer, most notably in the Old World and in the New World. They are one of the most ancient and powerful of all races in the Warhammer world. Much like their counterparts, the elves are tall, slender humanoids who are powerful in magic and live for thousands of years. They were introduced by Old Ones and achieved high levels of civilization, as well as taming the threat of chaos. They moved from the Old World to the New World by the Old Ones to start a fresh existence. There are 3 different races that are used on a tabletop game. They are the High Elves, Wood Elves and Dark Elves. Each of these races have a huge story linked to them, which is far too much to include in one video. Maybe one day I'll do a race specific video on each of the races. The High Elves were once masters of the mortal world. Now they are confined to Uthrian and scattered around the world in outposts. They are extremely adept in magic and have a close bond with dragons. They are ruled by the Phoenix King, and underneath him are the princes, princesses and mages. Whilst not as strong and formidable as orcs and dwarfs, they compensate for it with their dexterity and amazing agility. They muster one of the mightiest fleet and army in the world, and are feared by other powers. Even with that, they are a sad shadow of their former selves. Their old enemies get stronger as they get weaker. Who knows what the future holds for the High Elves? The Wood Elves are very different from their cousins and mainly dwell in the Old World, in Athel Loren. They are an isolation faction and are very secretive. They are very similar to their High Elf kin in appearance and stature, however they are more humble and less arrogant. They are friends with nature and the forest is their life. They consider themselves to be eternally at war as their forest home is surrounded by enemy. They will have no peace with the outside world, only moments of silence. Humans, orcs, wizards, dwarfs all see opportunities in Athel Loren, but the Wood Elves fight them off. Athel Loren is not just one realm, it is a collection of high realms tied together by kinship. The evil Dark Elves dwell on Naggaroth. The Dark Elves look down on their other elven cousins as weak and pathetic. Corruption and vileness below their skin has caused their skin to darken. They have a cold beauty contrary to their cousins' natural beauty. They are ruled by one ruler called Malekith, the Witch King of Naggaroth, who rides a black dragon. Below him are a collection of lords and ladies. The Dark Elf military is sadistic and full of heartless trained warriors who seek pleasure from the suffering of their enemy. Dark Elves and High Elves have extremely bloody wars, for the 2 factions hate each other. The Dark Elves are also famous for being pirates, raiding and capturing slaves for their realm and sick games. Notable elves: Malakath, Morathi, Orion, Ariel, Aenarion, Imric and Tyrion. There are many fantasy books, movies and games which feature elves. I can also mention Warhammer 40,000 as well, where the Elder and Dark Elder are quite similar to elves, and they're one of the only examples in science fiction. But this is fantasy, and they exist everywhere. Even I myself couldn't resist putting them in my book, for I love their aura and there's just something about them. So there you have it. I hope you found it interesting and possibly even learned something new. I'll be back soon to speak about another fantasy race, and personally my favourite, dwarfs. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like. Let's aim for 1 like again. Also, why not subscribe to be the first to find out when a new video is uploaded. I am HJ Cronin and I am signing out. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.